The lunar colony of New Horizon shimmered faintly under the cold light of Earth, its domes and spires casting long shadows across the gray dust. For centuries, humanity had looked to the stars with hope, expanding beyond their home planet in search of new beginnings. But expansion came at a cost. Tensions with alien species grew as resources dwindled and borders blurred. Among these aliens were the Varans, a proud and enigmatic race known for their advanced technology and disdain for human ambition. Kayla stood silently on the edge of one of the colony's observation decks, her sleek armor blending seamlessly into the metallic surroundings. Her presence was deliberate yet unassuming. She had arrived days ago under the guise of diplomatic talks, presenting herself as an ambassador seeking peace. In truth, her mission was far more sinister. The Varan Council had sent her to gather intelligence about human defenses, a precursor to what they believed would be an inevitable war. Her sharp eyes scanned the bustling corridors below through a holographic visor embedded in her helmet. Humans moved quickly, chatting animatedly or working tirelessly on machinery that kept the colony alive. To Kayla, they seemed chaotic, unpredictable, and reckless, all traits her people despised. She had been trained to see them as nothing more than invaders who cared only for conquest. Yet something about this place unsettled her. It wasn't fear, it was curiosity. For hours, she observed without moving, like a statue carved from shadow. Then, something caught her attention. A loud crash echoed from one of the engineering sectors, followed by shouts and the hiss of escaping air. Without hesitation, Kayla activated her cloaking device, rendering herself invisible, and slipped toward the source of the commotion. What she found left her stunned. A section of the colony's outer wall had collapsed due to structural failure, exposing the interior to the vacuum of space. Alarms blared as automated systems scrambled to seal off the breach, but several workers were still trapped inside the affected area. Kayla watched as a group of humans rushed toward the danger instead of fleeing it. They wore simple environmental suits, hastily grabbed from nearby lockers, and worked together to stabilize the damaged structure. One man, his face obscured by his helmet, used a handheld welding tool to reinforce a beam, while another guided a floating platform carrying replacement panels. A woman shouted instructions over the noise, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. Kayla couldn't understand their language clearly, but their actions spoke volumes. These humans weren't thinking about themselves. They were risking their lives to save others. As the minutes dragged on, Kayla felt a strange sensation stir within her chest. It wasn't anger or disgust. It was confusion. Everything she had been taught about humans told her they were selfish, driven solely by greed and power. But here they were, proving otherwise. Why would they endanger themselves for strangers? What purpose did such selflessness serve? Her thoughts were interrupted when one of the engineers lost his footing near the breach. His suit's tether snapped, sending him tumbling toward the gaping hole. Before anyone could react, another worker lunged forward, grabbing hold of the tether just in time. The rescuer anchored himself to the floor, straining against the pull of gravity, or lack thereof, but refusing to let go. After what felt like an eternity, the fallen engineer was pulled back to safety, both collapsing onto the ground in relief. Kayla deactivated her cloaking device and stepped back into the shadows. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Was this behavior typical among humans, or was it unique to this colony? Could her people have misjudged them entirely? She returned to her quarters later that evening, replaying the scene in her head. Her superiors would expect a report soon, detailing her findings about human weaknesses and vulnerabilities. But how could she explain what she had witnessed? How could she describe acts of courage and compassion when her own culture valued logic and efficiency above all else? That night, Kayla stared out the window at Earth's glowing surface, its blue and green hues a stark contrast to the lifeless moon beneath her feet. For the first time in her life, she questioned the beliefs she had always held sacred. Perhaps there was more to humanity than she had been led to believe. Perhaps they weren't the monsters her people claimed they were. But if that were true, then why had she come here to fight them? For a moment, Kayla considered her options. Fighting might give her a chance to escape, but the odds were against her. Surrendering meant trusting this human, and trust was something she rarely gave. Yet something in Elias's demeanor resonated with her. Reluctantly, she deactivated her cloaking device and stepped forward, hands raised in surrender. Her appearance startled the soldiers. Standing nearly 7 feet tall with iridescent skin and piercing golden eyes, Kayla looked every bit the alien warrior she was. Murmurs rippled through the group, but Elias remained unfazed. "Take her to detention," he ordered, his gaze never leaving hers, "and make sure she's treated fairly." As Kayla was escorted away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elias's actions were more than just protocol. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite place. For the first time since arriving on New Horizon, Kayla wondered if perhaps not all humans were as predictable as she'd been taught to believe. The detention cell was cold and sterile, its metallic walls reflecting the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Kayla sat cross-legged on the floor, her posture rigid despite the uncomfortable surface beneath her. Her hands rested loosely on her knees, fingers twitching occasionally, a subtle sign of irritation that only someone who truly understood Varen body language might notice. She had been stripped of her weapons and cloaking device, but the guards hadn't bothered to remove her armor. It was a small mercy, though one she didn't expect from humans. Outside the transparent energy barrier that served as her prison wall, 2 armed soldiers stood watch, their rifles slung across their chests. They exchanged quiet jokes and laughed softly, seemingly unfazed by the alien prisoner mere feet away. To Kayla, their behavior was baffling. How could they joke at a time like this? Didn't they realize she posed a threat? Or perhaps they simply didn't care. Either way, it grated against her nerves. Her thoughts were interrupted when the sound of boots echoed down the corridor. Captain Elias Drake appeared, his expression unreadable as he approached the cell. His presence commanded attention, even in such a confined space. The guards straightened slightly, nodding respectfully before resuming their casual banter. "Mind if I join you?" Elias asked, gesturing toward the bench outside the barrier. Kayla didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with narrowed eyes. This human confused her. Most captors would have interrogated her by now, demanding answers or threatening punishment. Yet here he was, acting as though she were nothing more than an inconvenient guest. Elias took her silence as permission and sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady but not intrusive. "You've got quite the reputation," he began, speaking in galactic standard. "Fast, stealthy, highly skilled. My men are impressed." Kayla remained silent, her golden eyes fixed on him like twin suns. "I'll admit," Elias continued, undeterred by her lack of response, "you're not what I expected. We've dealt with your kind before, but you seem different." At that, Kayla's lips curled into a faint sneer. "Different," she replied, her voice low and sharp, "because I did not kill your soldiers when I had the chance." Elias chuckled softly, though there was no mockery in his tone. "Exactly. Most Varens wouldn't hesitate. You must know how rare it is for one of your people to show restraint." Kayla's expression hardened. "I showed restraint because I am outnumbered, not because I value your lives." "Maybe," Elias said with a shrug. "Or maybe there's more to you than meets the eye." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the energy barrier filled the silence, a constant reminder of the barrier between them, not just physical, but cultural, ideological. Over the next few days, Elias made it a habit to visit Kayla regularly. At first, she ignored him completely, focusing instead on observing the humans around her. She noticed things she hadn't before, the way medical staff treated injured prisoners with care, how engineers worked tirelessly to repair damage caused by accidents, and how even the lowest-ranking soldiers shared food and stories during breaks. These small acts of kindness contradicted everything she'd been taught about humanity. One evening, Elias brought a datapad with him, sliding it onto the bench beside him. "Thought you might find this interesting," he said, tapping the screen to life. Images of Earth flickered across the display. Vast oceans, sprawling cities, lush forests. Kayla glanced at the screen briefly before turning away. "Why do you waste your time showing me this?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "Because I think you're curious," Elias replied simply. "And because I want you to understand us better. Maybe then you'll see we're not the monsters your leaders claim we are." Kayla clenched her jaw, torn between dismissing him outright and indulging her curiosity. Finally, she sighed and looked back at the datapad. The images mesmerized her despite herself. Earth was beautiful, a stark contrast to the barren moonscape of New Horizon. "They call it the Blue Planet," Elias explained. "It's where it all started for us, where we learned to dream, to hope, to reach for the stars. Not everyone agrees on how to get there, but most of us share the same goal: survival." Kayla frowned. "Survival often comes at a cost," she muttered, thinking of the countless battles her people had fought to protect their homeworld. "Yes," Elias agreed, nodding solemnly. "But does it have to come at the expense of others? That's the question we're still trying to answer." Their conversations grew longer over time, each exchange revealing new facets of both their species. Elias shared stories of his own struggles, losing comrades in battle, grappling with guilt, finding purpose in protecting innocence. Kayla listened intently, surprised by how much his words resonated with her own experiences. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to open up as well. She told him about her training, her missions, the pressure of living up to her people's expectations. She admitted, though only once, that she sometimes questioned whether the sacrifices demanded by her leaders were worth it. Elias nodded thoughtfully. "Questioning doesn't make you weak, Kayla. It makes you human." "I am not human," she snapped, though without venom. "No," Elias agreed, "but you're not so different either." As days turned into weeks, Kayla found herself looking forward to Elias's visits. Their bond deepened, built on mutual respect rather than trust, at least for now. Through him, she began to see humanity in a new light. Flawed, yes, but also capable of compassion and resilience. Meanwhile, news of her capture spread beyond the colony. Both human and Varen factions debated what to do next. Some called for immediate action, while others urged caution. Tensions simmered, threatening to boil over at any moment. Kayla knew her time here was limited. Eventually, she would have to choose a side, to fight for her people or stand against them. But for now, she allowed herself a brief reprieve, finding solace in the unexpected connection she'd formed with a human who refused to see her as an enemy. It began with a low rumble, a vibration so faint it could have been mistaken for the colony's usual hum of activity. But Kayla felt it differently, through her instincts, honed by years of combat training. Something was wrong, very wrong. She stood near the transparent barrier of her cell, watching as Elias entered the detention area once again. His face was pale, his movements hurried. Before he could say anything, alarms blared throughout the facility, piercing and relentless. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in a sinister glow. "Kayla," Elias said sharply, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to move. Now." "What is happening?" she demanded, her golden eyes narrowing. "A Varen strike force has breached the perimeter," Elias replied grimly. "They're targeting key locations, including this sector." Kayla's blood ran cold. This wasn't part of her mission. Her superiors hadn't authorized such an attack, at least not while she was still here. Did they know she was alive? Or worse, did they not care? Before she could process further, the energy barrier around her cell flickered and died. Elias gestured for her to follow him, but Kayla hesitated. Why would he release her now, when she posed a clear threat? "We don't have time for this." Elias snapped, his patience wearing thin. "If you want to live, come with me. If you don't, stay here and die. Your choice." His words struck a chord. Despite everything, Elias had shown her kindness, even trust. She owed him nothing, but something deep inside urged her to follow. With a curt nod, she stepped out of the cell. The corridor outside was a scene of controlled pandemonium. Soldiers rushed past, shouting orders and carrying wounded civilians. Explosions rocked the structure, sending tremors through the walls. Dust rained down from the ceiling as structural supports groaned under the strain. Elias led Kayla toward the command center, where senior officers were coordinating defenses. Along the way, they encountered pockets of resistance. Varen soldiers clad in sleek black armor, their weapons firing bursts of plasma that tore through walls and flesh alike. Kayla recognized their insignia. These were elite warriors, part of a faction within her military known for its ruthlessness. One of them spotted her and raised his weapon, barking commands in Varen. "Traitor," he spat. "You disgrace your people." Kayla didn't respond. Instead, she moved with precision, disarming the soldier before he could fire. Her movements were fluid, almost mechanical, as she incapacitated two more attackers in quick succession. Elias watched in awe, realizing for the first time just how skilled she truly was. When the immediate threat was neutralized, Elias turned to her. "Why are they calling you a traitor?" "They think I've gone soft," Kayla replied bitterly. "That I've betrayed my mission." "And have you?" Kayla didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. As they reached the command center, the full scope of the attack became clear. Holographic maps displayed enemy positions, showing multiple breaches across the colony. Casualty reports streamed in, painting a grim picture. Civilians, men, women, children, were trapped in collapsing sections of the base. "We need to evacuate them," Elias said, his voice heavy with urgency. "I'll help," Kayla offered without hesitation. Elias stared at her, surprised but grateful. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I may not agree with humanity, but I won't stand by and let innocents die." Together, they joined a rescue team tasked with reaching one of the most heavily damaged areas, a residential block near the colony's outer rim. The journey there was perilous, fraught with hazards ranging from falling debris to ambushes by Varen forces. At one point, Kayla shielded Elias from a collapsing beam, using her enhanced strength to hold it aloft until they could pass safely. "You saved me," Elias remarked later, his tone tinged with disbelief. "Don't read too much into it," Kayla shot back, though there was no real bite in her words. When they finally reached the residential block, the situation was dire. Dozens of civilians huddled together in makeshift shelters, coughing from dust-filled air and trembling with fear. Some were injured, others trapped beneath rubble. Kayla sprang into action, working alongside human engineers and medics to free survivors and stabilize the structure. Her knowledge of engineering proved invaluable, allowing her to identify weak points and prevent further collapse. For the first time in her life, she worked side by side with humans, not as adversaries, but as allies. Elias noticed the change in her demeanor. Gone was the cold, calculating warrior who had arrived weeks ago. In her place stood someone willing to risk everything for the greater good. It was a transformation he never thought possible. But the battle wasn't over yet. As they evacuated the last group of civilians, a massive explosion rocked the building. Flames erupted from nearby corridors, forcing everyone to retreat. Amid the chaos, Kayla realized that one child, a young girl clutching a stuffed toy, had been left behind. Without a second thought, she sprinted back into the inferno, ignoring Elias's shouts of protest. Smoke stung her eyes and lungs, but she pressed on, guided by the faint sound of crying. When she found the girl, she wrapped her in a protective embrace and dashed toward safety. Just as they reached the exit, another blast knocked them off their feet. Kayla shielded the child with her body, absorbing the brunt of the impact. Pain seared through her side, but she pushed it aside, focusing only on getting the girl to safety. When they emerged into the open, gasping for air, Elias rushed to their side. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Kayla nodded, though her expression was grim. We can't keep doing this piecemeal. We need to stop them at the source. Elias agreed. Together, they formulated a plan to infiltrate the Varen Command Center, located deep within the colony. It was a risky move, but staying put meant certain death for countless innocents. Elias led Kayla toward the command center, where senior officers were coordinating defenses. Along the way, they encountered pockets of resistance. Varen soldiers clad in sleek black armor, their weapons firing bursts of plasma that tore through walls and flesh alike. Kayla recognized their insignia. These were elite warriors, part of a faction within her military known for its ruthlessness. One of them spotted her and raised his weapon, barking commands in Varen. "Traitor," he spat. "You disgrace your people." Kayla didn't respond. Instead, she moved with precision, disarming the soldier before he could fire. Her movements were fluid, almost mechanical, as she incapacitated two more attackers in quick succession. Elias watched in awe, realizing for the first time just how skilled she truly was. When the immediate threat was neutralized, Elias turned to her. "Why are they calling you a traitor?" "They think I've gone soft," Kayla replied bitterly. "That I've betrayed my mission." "And have you?" Kayla didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. As they reached the command center, the full scope of the attack became clear. Holographic maps displayed enemy positions, showing multiple breaches across the colony. Casualty reports streamed in, painting a grim picture. Civilians, men, women, children, were trapped in collapsing sections of the base. "We need to evacuate them," Elias said, his voice heavy with urgency. "I'll help," Kayla offered without hesitation. Elias stared at her, surprised but grateful. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I may not agree with humanity, but I won't stand by and let innocents die." Together, they joined a rescue team tasked with reaching one of the most heavily damaged areas, a residential block near the colony's outer rim. The journey there was perilous, fraught with hazards ranging from falling debris to ambushes by Varen forces. At one point, Kayla shielded Elias from a collapsing beam, using her enhanced strength to hold it aloft until they could pass safely. "You saved me," Elias remarked later, his tone tinged with disbelief. "Don't read too much into it," Kayla shot back, though there was no real bite in her words. When they finally reached the residential block, the situation was dire. Dozens of civilians huddled together in makeshift shelters, coughing from dust-filled air and trembling with fear. Some were injured, others trapped beneath rubble. Kayla sprang into action, working alongside human engineers and medics to free survivors and stabilize the structure. Her knowledge of engineering proved invaluable, allowing her to identify weak points and prevent further collapse. For the first time in her life, she worked side by side with humans, not as adversaries, but as allies. Elias noticed the change in her demeanor. Gone was the cold, calculating warrior who had arrived weeks ago. In her place stood someone willing to risk everything for the greater good. It was a transformation he never thought possible. But the battle wasn't over yet. As they evacuated the last group of civilians, a massive explosion rocked the building. Flames erupted from nearby corridors, forcing everyone to retreat. Amid the chaos, Kayla realized that one child, a young girl clutching a stuffed toy, had been left behind. Without a second thought, she sprinted back into the inferno, ignoring Elias's shouts of protest. Smoke stung her eyes and lungs, but she pressed on, guided by the faint sound of crying. When she found the girl, she wrapped her in a protective embrace and dashed toward safety. Just as they reached the exit, another blast knocked them off their feet. Kayla shielded the child with her body, absorbing the brunt of the impact. Pain seared through her side, but she pushed it aside, focusing only on getting the girl to safety. When they emerged into the open, gasping for air, Elias rushed to their side. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Kayla nodded, though her expression was grim. "We can't keep doing this piecemeal. We need to stop them at the source." Elias agreed. Together, they formulated a plan to infiltrate the Varen Command Center, located deep within the colony. It was a risky move, but staying put meant certain death for countless innocents. As they prepared to move out, Kayla glanced at Elias, her resolve hardening. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let hatred dictate her actions anymore. The journey to the Varen Command Center was a harrowing one, each step fraught with danger and uncertainty. Kayla and Elias led a small team of human soldiers, their movements swift and deliberate as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the crumbling colony. The air grew thicker with smoke and dust, making it harder to breathe. But no one complained. Every second counted, and failure wasn't an option. Kayla took point, her senses attuned to every sound and movement around them. She had memorized the layout of the colony during her reconnaissance missions, giving her an edge in avoiding ambushes and finding alternate routes. Still, the Varen strike force seemed to anticipate their every move. Plasma bolts whizzed past their heads, narrowly missing their targets as they pressed forward. "We're running out of time," Elias muttered between bursts of gunfire, his voice strained. "If we don't shut down their main weapons soon, this whole place will collapse." Kayla nodded grimly. The Varen's primary objective was clear: to stabilize the colony's structural integrity until it imploded, taking all evidence of their unauthorized attack with it. It was a brutal tactic, one she recognized from her own training. But now, standing alongside humans who were risking their lives to save others, she felt nothing but disgust for such ruthlessness. As they approached the command center, the resistance intensified. A squad of Varen soldiers blocked their path, their weapons trained on the intruders. Kayla stepped forward, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "Stand down," she barked in Varen, her voice commanding despite her injuries. "This operation violates our council's orders. You have no authority here." The lead soldier sneered at her, his expression filled with contempt. "You dare question us? You, who abandoned your mission and aligned yourself with these primitives." "I haven't abandoned anything," Kayla shot back, her tone sharp. "I'm stopping you from committing an atrocity. If you proceed, you'll doom both our species to endless war." Her words caused a stir among the soldiers, some exchanging uncertain glances. Their loyalty wavered, torn between following orders and questioning the morality of their actions. Sensing an opportunity, Elias signaled his team to prepare for a coordinated assault. "Enough talk," the leader growled, raising his weapon. "You're either with us or against us." Before anyone could react, Kayla lunged forward, disarming the soldier with lightning-fast precision. Chaos erupted as the two groups clashed, plasma bolts illuminating the dim corridor. Kayla fought with everything she had, channeling her anger and frustration into each strike. Her blows were precise, calculated, leaving her opponents incapacitated but alive, a testament to her shifting priorities. Elias fought beside her, his movements less graceful but equally determined. Together, they formed a formidable duo, covering each other's weaknesses and exploiting gaps in the enemy's defenses. By the time the skirmish ended, the remaining Varen soldiers retreated, leaving the path to the command center clear. Breathing heavily, Kayla turned to Elias. "We need to hurry. They'll regroup soon." Inside the command center, they found what they were looking for: a massive energy cannon linked directly to the colony's power grid. Its purpose was clear: to overload the system and trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Kayla immediately began analyzing the device, searching for a way to disable it without causing further damage. "You know how to stop this thing?" Elias asked, keeping watch near the entrance. "Yes," Kayla replied, her fingers flying over the console. "But it won't be easy. I'll need to reroute the energy flow manually, which means exposing myself to high levels of radiation." Elias froze, his eyes widening. "Are you serious? That'll kill you." "It's the only way," Kayla said firmly, meeting his gaze. "If I don't do this, everyone dies, including the civilians we just saved." "No," Elias insisted, shaking his head. "There has to be another solution." "There isn't," Kayla snapped, her voice tinged with frustration. "This is my responsibility. My people started this. I have to end it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of her decision hung heavy in the air, pressing down on them both. Finally, Elias stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "If you're going to do this," he said quietly, "then let me help you. We're in this together, remember?" Kayla hesitated, torn between pride and gratitude. In the end, she nodded, allowing him to assist in stabilizing the system while she worked on the core. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they labored side by side, sweat dripping from their brows and exhaustion clouding their minds. Just as Kayla finished rerouting the energy flow, a deafening explosion rocked the room. Shrapnel flew in all directions, forcing Elias to dive in front of her to shield her from the blast. Pain shot through his body as shards embedded themselves in his armor, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through it. "Elias," Kayla cried out, her voice laced with panic. "I'm fine," he groaned, struggling to stand. "Just finish it." With trembling hands, Kayla activated the final sequence, shutting down the cannon and cutting off its connection to the grid. The hum of energy faded, replaced by an eerie silence. For a brief moment, relief washed over her, until she noticed the blood seeping through Elias's suit. "You idiot," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why did you do that?" "Because," Elias managed a weak smile despite the pain. "That's what allies do. They protect each other." Kayla knelt beside him, her mind racing. This human, this stubborn, selfless human, had risked his life for hers. Again, she didn't understand why, but she couldn't deny the impact it had on her. As reinforcements arrived to secure the area, Kayla stayed by Elias's side, refusing to leave until medics stabilized him. Her resolve hardened as she vowed to honor his sacrifice, not just with words, but with action. Whatever happened next, she would ensure that his faith in her wasn't misplaced. The aftermath of the battle was a blur of chaos and urgency. Kayla stood in the command center, her body trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion and emotion. The energy cannon had been neutralized, but the cost weighed heavily on her. Elias lay unconscious on a stretcher, his breathing shallow as medics worked frantically to stabilize him. His selfless act, shielding her from the explosion, had saved her life, yet it left her grappling with guilt and gratitude in equal measure. As reinforcements secured the area, Kayla took a moment to gather herself. Her hands were smeared with grease and blood, her armor scorched and dented from the fight. She looked like a warrior who had faced hell and emerged changed. A human officer approached her cautiously, his expression unreadable. "You did good out there," he said, his tone respectful. "Without you, we wouldn't have stopped them." Kayla didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced at Elias, whose condition remained critical. "He shouldn't have done that," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to the officer. "He's a soldier," the man replied simply. "Protecting others is what he does." Kayla frowned. To her, such actions defied logic. Sacrificing oneself for an enemy. It made no sense according to Varen teachings. Yet here she was, witnessing it firsthand, and feeling its impact deep within her core. The officer handed her a small device, a communicator tuned to the colony's internal network. "We intercepted transmissions from the Varen strike force," he explained. "Thought you might want to hear this." Kayla accepted the device hesitantly, pressing it to her ear. Static crackled before a voice came through, distorted but recognizable. It belonged to Commander Jannar, one of the most influential figures in the Varen military hierarchy. This operation was sanctioned by necessity, Jannar declared coldly. Humanity must see the consequences of their aggression. If Kayla interferes, consider her expendable. Her stomach churned at the words. So, They hadn't cared whether she lived or died. Worse still, they had painted humanity as the aggressor, framing the attack as retaliation rather than unprovoked violence. Lies upon lies. This wasn't justice. It was manipulation. Fury surged within her, but it wasn't directed at the humans around her. For the first time, she saw her own people through clear eyes. Arrogant, reckless, willing to destroy lives in pursuit of dominance. And she had almost been complicit in their schemes. Determined to set things right, Kayla turned to the officer. "I need access to your communications array," she said firmly. "I'm broadcasting a message to my people." The officer hesitated, glancing at the medics tending to Elias. Finally, he nodded. "Do what you have to do." Minutes later, Kayla stood before a camera mounted in the command center, her face illuminated by harsh overhead lights. Behind her, technicians monitored the transmission feed, ensuring it reached every corner of the galaxy. Her heart pounded as she prepared to speak, not just as a soldier, but as someone who had seen the truth. "To my fellow Varens," she began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "This is Kayla. What you've been told about humanity is wrong. I came here believing them to be invaders, but I found something else entirely. They are flawed, yes, but so are we. Their capacity for compassion and cooperation is unmatched, even in the face of adversity. What happened today proves that." She paused, taking a deep breath. This attack was not sanctioned by our council. It was orchestrated by those who seek war at any cost. Innocent lives were lost, Varen and human alike. We cannot let this continue. If we stand by and allow hatred to divide us, we doom both our species to extinction. Her gaze hardened as she addressed her superiors directly. "To Commander Jinnar and those who share his vision. Your actions dishonor everything we claim to stand for. If you persist in this path, know that I will oppose you with every ounce of strength I possess." The room fell silent as Kayla stepped away from the camera. Her message was raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. For better or worse, there was no turning back now. Meanwhile, Elias stirred faintly on the stretcher, his eyelids fluttering open. Medics hovered nearby, monitoring his vitals closely. When he spotted Kayla approaching, a weak smile crossed his face. "You? Okay," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I should be asking you that," Kayla replied, kneeling beside him. "You nearly got yourself killed." "Worth it," Elias murmured, closing his eyes briefly. "Did we win?" "Yes," Kayla said softly. "But the real victory comes next, stopping this war before it begins." Elias nodded faintly, too weak to argue. Kayla placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of gratitude she would never have considered weeks ago. In that moment, she realized how far she'd come, from viewing humans as enemies to seeing them as allies, friends even. Across the galaxy, Kayla's message spread like wildfire. Some Varens dismissed it as propaganda, while others questioned the legitimacy of the rogue faction's actions. Back on New Horizon, diplomats scrambled to capitalize on the momentum, organizing emergency talks between human and Varen representatives. Kayla played a key role in these negotiations, using her dual perspective to bridge the gap between the two sides. Though skepticism lingered, her sincerity resonated with many, including some high-ranking officials who had once doubted humanity's intentions. For the first time in decades, hope flickered on the horizon. Not because of grand declarations or treaties, but because individuals like Kayla and Elias had chosen to defy hatred and embrace understanding. Yet challenges remained. Old prejudices ran deep, and trust wouldn't come easily. But Kayla knew one thing for certain. Change was possible, if enough people believed in it. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed. The weeks following the attack on New Horizon were a whirlwind of activity. Kayla found herself thrust into a role she had never anticipated, mediator between two species on the brink of war. Her message had ignited a spark of hope, but transforming that spark into lasting peace required more than words. It demanded action, patience, and an unwavering commitment to understanding. Negotiations took place aboard a neutral orbital station, its sleek design symbolizing unity despite the tension in the air. Representatives from both humanity and the Varens gathered around a circular table, their expressions guarded yet hopeful. Kayla stood at the center, her presence commanding attention. She was no longer just a soldier, she was a bridge, a living testament to the possibility of coexistence. Elias joined her, his injuries healing but leaving faint scars as reminders of the sacrifices made. Though he still walked with a slight limp, his determination remained unshaken. Together, they formed an unlikely duo, their bond forged in fire and tempered by shared purpose. The first days of talks were fraught with challenges. Old grievances surfaced, accusations flew, and tempers flared. Some Varen delegates refused to acknowledge Kayla's authority, dismissing her as a traitor. Human representatives, wary of betrayal, questioned whether the Varens could be trusted after such blatant aggression. But Kayla pressed on, drawing upon everything she had learned during her time among humans. She recounted stories of courage and compassion, the engineers risking their lives to save others, the medics treating wounded civilians without hesitation, and Elias shielding her from harm despite their differences. These anecdotes painted a picture of humanity that contradicted long-held stereotypes, forcing even the most skeptical Varens to reconsider their views. "Hatred blinds us," Kayla said during one heated session, her voice firm yet compassionate. "It tells us that our enemies are monsters, incapable of change. But I've seen otherwise. Humans are flawed, yes, but so are we. If we focus only on our differences, we'll never see the common ground beneath our feet." Her words resonated deeply, particularly with younger Varen delegates who had grown disillusioned with their leader's dogmatic rhetoric. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the wall of distrust separating the two sides. Elias played his part too, sharing tales of resilience and ingenuity. He spoke of humanity's struggles, not just against external threats, but against itself. Wars fought over resources, ideologies clashing until compromise became the only path forward. His honesty disarmed skeptics, showing them that imperfection didn't equate to weakness. It simply meant room for growth. As trust grew, so did cooperation. Joint engineering teams worked together to repair the damaged colony, combining human creativity with Varen precision. Medical staff exchanged knowledge, developing treatments that benefited both species. Even cultural exchanges began taking shape, with art exhibits and performances showcasing the richness of each civilization's heritage. Yet not everyone welcomed this newfound harmony. Hardliners on both sides resisted reconciliation, spreading fear and misinformation to undermine progress. Commander Jannar, disgraced but undeterred, continued to rally dissenters, warning of the dangers posed by weakness and compromise. One evening, as Kayla reviewed updates from the negotiation sessions, a shadow crossed her quarters. Turning quickly, she found herself face to face with a familiar figure, a rogue Varen operative sent to silence her once and for all. "You've betrayed your people," the assassin snarled, raising a blade. Kayla didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, meeting the threat head-on. "No," she replied calmly. "I've chosen a better future, for all of us." A brief struggle ensued, ending when security forces intervened, apprehending the intruder. Though shaken, Kayla emerged unscathed, her resolve stronger than ever. Months passed, and the fruits of their labor began to take root. A formal treaty was signed, establishing guidelines for peaceful interaction and resource sharing. Both sides agreed to establish joint outposts across contested territories, ensuring transparency and collaboration moving forward. Kayla chose to stay on New Horizon temporarily, serving as a liaison between humans and Varens. Her superiors reluctantly approved, recognizing the value of her unique perspective. Meanwhile, Elias recovered fully, resuming his duties as captain, while mentoring younger officers in the art of diplomacy. Their partnership evolved beyond mere alliance. They became friends, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. Through Elias, Kayla discovered aspects of humanity she had never imagined: humor, curiosity, and boundless optimism. In turn, she introduced him to facets of Varen culture, from intricate rituals to breathtaking music composed entirely of harmonic frequencies. One quiet evening, as they stood side by side on the observation deck, gazing at Earth's shimmering surface, Kayla reflected on how far she'd come. Once consumed by duty and obedience, she now embraced uncertainty, knowing it held the key to growth. "What happens next?" Elias asked softly, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Kayla admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." Together. The word carried weight, promising not just survival, but something greater: hope. For the first time in centuries, two species stood united, not because they had forgotten their differences, but because they had chosen to rise above them. And as Kayla looked toward the stars, she felt a quiet certainty settle within her. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning.